Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome you. I'm welcoming you to this webinars today on the behalf of the Biochemical Society and Portland Press. And so today's webinar is jointly organized with Spinup Science and is part of our dedicated biochemistry focus on ECR, which is Early Career Research webinar series. For those of you who have never attended this webinar series, this includes topics in different areas of research of molecular biosciences, but it also includes practical sessions supporting career development, like the webinar today. So in these webinars, you will have the opportunity to ask questions, but we also encourage you to suggest topics for future webinars in this series. My name is Correia-Melo, and I am a postdoctoral training fellow at the Francis Crick Institute in London. But I'm also a member of the training team panel of the Biochemical Society. And I'm very pleased to be chairing this webinar today that is entitled From PhD to CEO, Becoming an Innovation Leader. And this is part of our dedicated early career research program of webinars focused on career guidance and support. So during this session, we will welcome Ben Miles, which started off as a physicist, and then he went on to do a PhD on nanophysics. And after that, he went on to co-found 3 companies. And so he's a co-founder of Science Angel Syndicate, which is an organization supporting investments in science. He's also a co-founder of the Protolyst, a digital workspace for professional researchers. And if that wasn't enough, he's also a CEO of Spinup Science, which supports translating academic discovery into impact into society. So Dr. Miles has built a career unlocking potential scientists and scientific discoveries. And he will be sharing in this webinar his experience and also will reflect on his exciting career, both academic and professional. And he will be sharing the knowledge he would have liked to have known at the beginning of his career. He will also outline options available for researchers in innovation, but also he will be discussing the skills and qualities you can develop to unlock your career potential and build your capability and ultimately excel in your career in your field. So this session will basically provide you with the opportunity to gain insights into different ways to developing your career professionally. I would also like to mention that questions will be asked after Ben's presentation, and we will have an extended Q&A session, and you can ask your questions during the talk. And so you need to type in the question box shown in the screen. And we will try to answer as many questions as time allows. And with this, I would like to hand over to Ben, and I'm excited to hear what you have to tell us, Ben. Over you.
Clara, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Ben, as Clara introduced me so kindly. Today, what I want to talk about really is all of the bits that Clara touched on, but really kind of over the narrative structure of how I moved from being a PhD student into ultimately, slightly serendipitously, into the role of CEO, or a few different CEO positions that I currently look after. There we go. So my background is in physics. I did my master's at the University of Bristol. I went on to do my PhD at the University of Bristol. I'm an optical physicist by background, so I built equipment, I wrote software. We looked at nanoparticles, see if we could use them for targeting different therapeutics as they made their way into different cell strands that we were looking at. Overall, the process was absolutely fantastic. I loved every second of it. And it was something that I really wanted to capture in my career, that feeling of excitement, that feeling of self-directed exploration, and the feeling of doing something that ultimately at the end of the day, not only was I proud of doing, but equally that I felt had some impact in the world. And I think all of those messages are something that resonate with a lot of people as why they get into science in the first place, to explore, to tackle different problems, but ultimately to tackle different problems that that matter at the end of the day. As mentioned, I have a few different roles a few different hats that I wear. I'm the founder and CEO of Spinup Science. I'm the co-founder and director of Science Angel Syndicate, the co-founder and CEO of a company called Protolyst. I look after a few different academic spin-out companies that are trying to take things that they discovered in the lab and move them into the real world. I'm also an honorary lecturer in entrepreneurship and general troublemaker, apparently. Today, as I said, I want to talk about the pathway, because I think it's really unbelievably hard to see into how people found themselves ultimately in the positions that some people kind of aspire to. And I think once you demystify that process, it actually becomes much more straightforward, much less intimidating, and much easier to replicate. So that's what we're kind of trying to do. I'm going to talk specifically for researchers, but I notice in the audience there's a lot of undergraduates, a lot of master's students. My word of advice would be do a PhD and then follow this pathway. Equally, if you're in the PhD, if you're in the postdoc, hopefully some of these things will be useful for you. We'll touch on a whole number of different topics, but I broadly tried to categorize it down to four key areas that I want to talk about. First, the problem with PhDs, which doesn't sound like a very optimistic start, but it turns out okay at the end, I promise. I want to talk about PhDs in terms of a risk profile and what to do beyond the PhD. I want to talk about how to develop vision, which is a bit of a kind of overstatement maybe for working out what it is that you want to do in life. And I want to talk about serendipity, because it turns out that serendipity isn't so serendipitous. You can engineer it for yourself to quite a good degree. So to begin, the problem with PhDs. PhD experience, as I'm sure many of you in the audience will be more than aware, is ultimately a crash course in learning how to learn. That's what it is at the end of the day. That's its greatest degree of utility. Although you'll feel like you come out absolutely, hopefully a world expert in something very, very narrow in particular, you might be quite tempted to say, this is what I'm good at and it's just this, and very much it will feel that way towards the end of it. Actually, really what it is just a perfect, probably the best way that I can possibly think of being afforded the opportunity to teach yourself how to quickly learn things that are very deep and very complex. That process feels slightly chaotic in its nature. Sometimes there are big lofty goals at the end of it, like curing cancer or whatever your particular topic may be. But actually the reality of the situation very much more on a day-to-day basis is slightly less exciting, but it's the sum of that experience that I think is really useful. My problem with the PhD is that it traditionally prepares you for this journey. You spend 4 years sitting in the PhD, maybe 3.5 years sitting in the PhD, coming out with an arm's long list of papers, turning up to a bunch of conferences, learning how to vehemently defend interferometric cross-polarization microscopy, in my case, but whatever your topic area is, vehemently defending it in front of an audience that doesn't believe what it is that you're saying. And all of that trains you very well, but it trains you very well for a very specific pathway. That pathway is that academic pathway, postdoc, lecturer, professor. And I didn't mind, because that's exactly the pathway that I anticipated that I was going to follow from quite an early age, sort of 10, 12, also like aspirations of professor is that end goal. And I think that's true for a lot of people when they get into the PhD. The problem with that aspiration is that increasingly that is a very hard track to follow. This is oops, there we are. This is a graph from a study done by the Royal Society back in 2010, I think, that tracks the trajectory of people that have done PhDs in a science topic and works out where they've gone in life. It turns out, if you look at the numbers, about 53% of people, slightly over half, within a year of graduating a PhD, find themselves somewhere outside of science. Typically, what they will cite as the reasons is lack of job opportunities within industry and lack of job opportunities within academia. And if you notice kind of the further kind of rates of attrition through this, you'll notice that 30% or so go on to be kind of early career researchers into permanent staff, maybe lecture staff, but actually the rate of attrition down to full-time academic professor, the kind of the goal at the end of the day, is very, very, very low. It's here it was 0.45%. I think it's actually a little bit lower than that. I think it's about 0.1%. And actually, something quite similar happens when you move into industry. If you move into industry, if you're not careful, you are flagged as a smart person. And that's really dangerous, because if you're a smart person, what you inadvertently come up against is the idea of this kind of glass ceiling, where if you are viewed as someone that's very good in a technical area that has huge utility there, you won't necessarily get those opportunities to test your hand moving up the ladder, moving up in the ranks at those more kind of senior management positions. You'll be viewed and kind of classified and pigeonholed as a technical person. That makes it very difficult and sometimes very frustrating, and ultimately we see quite a lot of scientists, engineers alike ultimately saying, well, okay, I want to get out of this field so that I can feel I can actually keep progressing in my career. All in all, the sum of this kind of activity is that people, more often than not, end up leaving the field. And I think that's a shame, given that 4 years of hard graft has gone into this sort of work, often putting you at the forefront of a research field. This was what happened broadly to me. I finished my PhD back in 2016 or so, so five years ago, wow. And I merged into an academic job market that just didn't exist. I was working in nanoscience at the time, and basically nanoscience had gone into a bit of a slump. There wasn't much funding around, and as a consequence of there not being much funding, there weren't many postdoc positions. There was one postdoc position that I found. It was in Texas, and it was for about 6 months. And I didn't like the idea of picking up my whole life, moving to Texas for 6 months for a whole host of reasons, coming back and then trying to find where the next one was. That felt like too much uncertainty, yeah, we'll talk about uncertainty in a second. The other thing that I really was kind of concerned about coming to the end of the PhD, and again, like restating the idea that I really liked that exploration of science that I went through, was that I might move into what I call some of these known names, some of these big companies, and ultimately become too confined or feel too confined, feel like I was a small cog in a big machine, and that my everyday efforts, my everyday impacts weren't actually that meaningful, weren't actually that contributive to the wider kind of impact or direction of the entity that I was involved in. I didn't really like that idea. The wonderful thing about coming to the end of the PhD, specifically in my case, was that I didn't have a house, I didn't have a spouse, those things not related in any way, and really the only requirement for me to consider myself being successful was to be paid more than 14 grand a year, because that was the PhD stipend. So I've proven that I could survive off of just 14 grand a year. As long as, you know, £14,001 a day, I would have made some progress and I'd be happy. And what that really, in retrospect, I've thought about this quite a lot, but really, like, this is true of a lot of people that go through the PhD process. Not all of them by any means, but a lot of them. And actually, this is a really rare position in life to sit. That intersection where you have arguably some of the highest utility, some of the highest capability, being close to a world leader in some specific deep technical topic. And at the end of the day, you only need to be paid slightly more than 14 grand a year to feel like you're going somewhere, and equally to keep you alive and ticking. That utility versus risk profile is incredibly rare. And what I'd encourage you to do is take advantage of it, because it doesn't happen almost at any other time in your life. Never again would I say you have that level of capability against that marginal level of risk. So I did what seemed totally logical and slightly worried my parents at the time. I said, I'm going to try a startup company, and I'm going to try a startup company that sounds like it's doing something adventurous, probably that won't work, probably that will mean that I'm out of a job in 6 months. And, you know, then you think back to that postdoc in Texas and actually you think that wasn't maybe such a bad deal. But what I found was a company called Xylo. Xylo were a spin-out company, which means they were working on a piece of technology as academics within the university, and they decided this has commercial value, let's try and turn it into a company. They spun out of the university. Piece of technology that they had, something called a synthetic lectin. It was basically a molecule that could bind with very high affinity to glucose, and only glucose. And that's interesting in the wider world, because you might be able to turn it into a diagnostic device, or you might be able to turn it into a therapeutic for the treatment of something like diabetes. And you want a really sensitive, really selective molecule there, because you otherwise worry that, well, sugar, glucose, looks a lot like fructose, looks a lot like basically any other sugar. To an optical physicist, kind of looks like water because the bonds are similar, even looks a bit like paracetamol. The idea that this molecule existed that bound specifically to glucose with really high affinity was exciting, and the world hadn't seen anything like that before. This was about 1 million times better than mankind or nature had ever produced up until that point. So they were excited to get that started. And I joined them as an optical physicist. The idea being, could we turn this molecule into some sort of technology that would allow us to transduce binding events, and in so doing, let us detect the rates of the blood sugar levels within a diabetic patient. And what I found in doing this process was that this is broadly, not exactly, but broadly, pretty much exactly what I'd been doing during my PhD. There were absolutely some new technical problems to solve, but actually that had been my role largely, making steps forward, making steps backward in the wrong direction, but ultimately trying to engineer a technology, navigating an unknown, and self-teaching, because this is something that no one had ever done before. And actually, with that, armed with that capability of having done that for the past 4 years or so, I found that there was just a piece of my brain that wasn't occupied. And that piece of my brain just had essentially free time on its hands. It was essentially just twiddling its thumbs. And what that free time allowed me to do was just start looking at other pieces of the business, starting to creep out of the engineering team. And I found myself doing things like pitching for investment on behalf of the company. I found myself managing the budget and doing forecasts and looking after the whole kind of engineering side of the company. It's only a very small company, so that's not too big of an ask. I found myself looking at the competitors and using it to inform my direction as to why we should engineer towards a certain solution and not other solutions. I did silly things like I helped build the brand, I helped build the website, I helped ultimately just try and identify what that market opportunity was and what actually needed to happen. And all of these skill sets are really useful and really hard to learn if you aren't sitting in the environment that enables you to learn them. It's really hard to learn them with kind of chalk and talk by reading a book about them. It's really easy to learn them by just sitting down in the headspace and trying to work them out yourself. And actually what I found was that this started to train my ability to look at the wider world and see things that other people, and when I say other people not sitting in a startup company trying to solve these sorts of technical problems that had real world impact, otherwise couldn't see. And I think that in retrospect always struck me, because I always liked the idea that maybe someday, though I didn't have an idea for a company at the time, I might be able to start something of my own. I didn't know what it was, but equally, how would I know what it was? Because I'd spent all of my time, master's, PhD, deeply ingrained in physics, enjoying the academic kind of workload, not looking at the wider world too hard by any means. And this drew me to the conclusion, which I believe absolutely vehemently, that really the interesting things in life happen at those cross sections, at those intersections between domains of discipline, between the boundaries of different disciplines. Where I was sitting within that startup company absolutely was terrifying, but absolutely was a really good way of learning about the wider world and how to arm myself with the skill sets that ultimately would be complementary to my technical set of skills. And I always position that in contrast to what I felt like in academia and what I felt like, or what I feel my friends feel like when they talk to me about the roles that they fulfill in industry. Where very much at the center of them, at the center of the puzzle is them, and around them are layers of support, supervisors, groups, departments, HR teams, people at the end of the day that it's their job to make sure that you get paid and that you don't go hungry and that you don't go not looked after. And to put that in stark contrast to what it feels like to sit in a 6-person startup company, there isn't any of that infrastructure. If you want to get paid at the end of the day, then you need to learn how to deliver a message to investors and convince those investors to part with their money and understand what that process actually means and how it actually works, so that you can move money into the bank account so you can pay yourself. If you need to hire an employee, you need to work out what employment law is, and then you need to work out how to write an employment contract, then you need to work out how to hire a good candidate. And all of these problems you're just immediately faced with, because the barrier between yourself and the outside world is pretty much non-existent. You are absolutely at the interface. As I said, that feels scary, but it teaches you a huge amount. And ultimately what I think it forced me to do was to unlearn that feeling, which I don't think any of us really realize we are going down this route, but we are, of slow and steady kind of learned helplessness, particularly as you go through undergrad, particularly as you go through the masters, maybe a little bit less as you go through the PhD. You have broadly structures set out for you, because at the end of the day, university organizations are wonderful and they want you to succeed. So they give you some rails to run on to hopefully pop you out in the right place at the right time. When you don't have any of those rails, you're forced to create them for yourself, and you really start to learn how to actually take ideas from 0 to 1, where you don't have any infrastructure around you, to starting to assemble something. And where I found that was a really nice kind of learning intersection was the similarity between ultimately what it is to be a researcher, which is someone that has, in my mind, a huge amount of overlap with entrepreneur. Here is the word that I picked, but equally call them CEO, call them leader, call them innovator, whatever it is. Ultimately, there's a huge amount of overlap. The problem set that a researcher is solving just is a problem set that exists within the scientific realm, an academic problem set where the metrics are papers and further grants and publications and all of those sorts of things, conferences, appearances, all that sort of stuff. And the metrics for the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the CEOs, the leaders are similar, but they're based in kind of the marketplace rather than in academic research. And the skill sets that are the commonality between those two groups is a rare, and it is absolutely rare, ability and desire to solve those sorts of hard problems in a way that is largely self-directed. And Xylo for me became that really nice learning environment where absolutely I was doing my day job of developing some core technologies. I was scratching the itch of wanting to use my scientific background to implement some innovation in the world that I hoped would have some positive impact on people. But I was also building out all of that kind of soft skill set offering, and I call it soft skill set offering, but don't make that sound like it isn't valuable. It's, I would argue, much more valuable than the harder skill set piece, because it allows you to actually unlock the full capability of that technical headspace that you already possess through going through the university process. And so when I started to apply it for myself, really it was an act of serendipity. And I believe that through and through. And serendipity in my mind is something that can be engineered, because if you put yourself reliably in situations that are at these interfaces of different interesting opportunities, you'll find that more things that are of interest come your way. Back in Bristol, when we were sitting in this startup company, there were 2 science spin-outs. There was Xylo and a company called Ultra Haptics. And that was pretty much it. What it turned out had happened was that basically every single time an interesting company came out of the university, and this is why jobs were so hard to find as a PhD graduate, every time an interesting company spun out of a university, they upped sticks and left. They went to Oxford, they went to Cambridge, or they went to London, because that's where the investment is, that's where the entrepreneurs and CEOs and advisors are, and that's where the infrastructure is, that's where the wet lab spaces are that you can rent as an early stage science company. And in Bristol, we didn't have any of those things. What we decided to do, though, and going back to that whole idea of just being in a position where you can realize problems in the world and realize that you are capable of solving them, is rather than moving to Oxford, Oxford was the one that we were looking at, to say instead, let's just solve this problem. Let's rally some people around us. Let's find some of those stakeholders. Let's sell some dreams. We went out and raised about £2.5 million from some business angels, learned how to build a science building. Turns out it's not too difficult. 18 months later, had gone from twinkling of an idea in the back of the founders' team's eyes to something that was real. And we had this incubator for science companies in the city of Bristol. We're like, great, we've solved the problem. No longer will there be this brain drain out of the city and into Oxford, Cambridge, London, because who wants to live there? We like living in Bristol. But we were immediately struck with a problem, which is how do we keep the lights on? And again, it goes back to that idea of just sitting in an intersection of interesting places where change is happening. Turns out creating science companies is really hard. On the left-hand side here is Stanford's hit rate. Out of 10,000 ideas that their tech transfer team have looked at, they chose to patent 5,000 of them. 3 of them went on to be blockbusters. 3 of them went on to be really interesting companies that got started, again, from 0 to 1. We don't have a Stanford in the UK, but we do have Oxford, Cambridge, London, as I keep going on about. Outside of those places, we really struggle to create those sorts of companies. And in the rare instance we do create them, they usually leave. So our goal was to try and take academic discovery and help it more reliably turn into impact, because we wanted to generate companies out of the local universities so that they could, one, keep the lights on in the incubator that we built, but equally because we thought that academic discovery to really generate impact in society needed to come out the doors and be more than just a PDF. There's a problem with this though, which is that when you do academic discovery, typically it's quite early stage. It's a little bit rough around the edges. When you go and you try and license it, say, to industry, what they'll often say is that it looks really interesting, but it's a little bit too early. Keep working on it, keep polishing it, keep refining it, come back to us in 5 years. And most academics at that stage say, it's not really how the academic system works. Like, I need to do new and novel, interesting things that I can write papers about. So typically people don't go in that direction as often as you maybe would expect them to. The other option for them is to say, let's start up a company. And the problem is with that very often where that technology, where that discovery comes from is deep in an academic lab as a product of 10 or 20 years of academic thought. And the senior academic behind it doesn't often want to start that company, say goodbye to that hard-fought tenured position where we know already that there is a reasonably high rate of competition and start something that arguably is quite risky. And all of those things put a bit of a barrier to getting ideas out of the lab and into the real world. But this is where my story kind of came into it, because I mean, I'd sat in that experience before. I'd watched those ideas come out of the lab and move into the world. And I also was intimately familiar with the idea that PhDs would really like a job at the end of the day that not only used their science, but also empowered them to make an impact, make a difference, start and lead something that is interesting and innovative. And I just wondered, I just thought to myself quietly, like, I wonder if we can use PhDs and postdocs as people to kind of circumvent this problem, because they're going out the door anyway. And if they're going out the door, they might as well be holding a really interesting piece of technology and try and start a company, because their risk profile is incredibly low and their utility is incredibly high. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, because sitting in that startup experience is one of the best ways to learn all of the skill sets that basically open up any other career trajectory for you. And it's one of the quickest ways to learn all of those sorts of things. So really, I thought there's probably nothing to lose in this equation. And then something fortunate happened. Xylo, which I've talked about quite extensively already, back in 2018 was acquired for $800 million by a company called Novo Nordisk that were interested in using the technology to build a next generation therapeutic insulin. So the idea of a smart insulin or a smart pancreas. What that did for us, what that did for me specifically, I guess, was put me in a really interesting position. And I bring up this idea now because I think it's useful and it's one that I go back to quite a lot. The 3 U's of good opportunity. Upside potential, as in it's got to be worth doing it. An opportunity is only a good opportunity if there's some benefit at the end of it. Maybe it's papers, maybe it's financial reward, maybe it's innovating a technology to market. Unfair advantage, which is having some capability behind you that not a lot of other people have. And there's unseen change. And unseen change is the most complicated one to talk about, but it could be a new piece of technology. It could be a change in the market that you notice, but not many other people do notice. The whole idea behind it is that you want to see the intersection of something that's absolutely worth doing with the intersection of there won't be too many competitors there trying to compete against you. You don't want it to be a numbers game. You want to engineer as much probability of luck for yourself as possible. Off the back of the Xylo exit, we suddenly had a bit of unfair advantage. Suddenly people were looking at Bristol, and Bristol's marketing team were getting a bit nervous and saying, oh yeah, we are supposed to be really good at commercializing research. Look, we've had this fantastic one exit, but how do we engineer a pipeline of more innovation activity? So I had an opportunity and I had some kind of capability and some personal experience. I said, let's set up a company. What's the worst that can happen? I'll just, if it goes bust in 6 months, it'll be a fun story to tell people. So I started a company called Spinup Science, which is the first company I started, really with a simple goal, just to engineer serendipity as reliably as possible. We didn't have any money, and there wasn't much money around to do either of the things that I wanted to do, which was either train PhDs, master's students and postdocs, or to support early stage founding teams as an incubator or an accelerator to help them on in their journey so that they could move quicker, fill up the incubator. So I came up with the idea, which is reasonably simple, of just saying, can I do one of these tasks at the same time as doing the other? Because the working thesis was the way I learned to feel comfortable running a company was to sit in someone else's company and see how the operations were working. Once I'd done that, once I'd kind of seen the pathway, it felt less scary and I felt like I could do it for myself. The idea for the early stage founding teams was, at the early stages, you're usually a founding team of 1 or 2 people. What would be really beneficial would be to be surrounded by now a bunch of clever folk, master's students, PhD students, postdocs, to accelerate your journey, your startup journey. And the benefit to those master's students is that they get that first class, a front row seat into entrepreneurship, to see it from the inside, which no one ever gets to see. With the end goal being converting some of these folk into early founding teams and starting the process again. Super simple idea. That's literally the entire business model of my company. It's trivially simple at the end of the day, but it's hugely effective. The goal for us was to create a generation of PhDs, masters, postdocs, etc., that not only at the core of them had this unique technical capability, but ultimately also had all of the surrounding skill sets that are very easy to pick up inside of a startup company, very hard to pick up in any other walk of life, but ultimately open up a lot of doors for you, regardless of the direction that you want to go in. We started doing that in Bristol back in 2016 when we had 2 companies. Bristol nowadays, well, this was from last year, has about 50 companies. And this is something that we're trying to replicate across the UK. And recently, in the past kind of 2 years or so, we've picked up and we've moved into places like Bath, into Liverpool, into Manchester, up to Edinburgh, just opened a branch in Ireland. Just trying to replicate these things, just trying to introduce masters, PhDs, postdocs to people that are early in the entrepreneurial pathway, to try and create that intergenerationality between those two groups. 1, to show role models to the next generation, but 2, to turn those little companies into bigger companies as quickly as possible, and to create ecosystem, engineer ecosystem in local to interesting academic institutions. And ultimately, hopefully, at the end of the day, mean that people don't need to move to Oxford, Cambridge, or London. They can stay close to their city. That's largely the talk that I wanted to talk through. There's some other points that maybe we'll get to in the questions and answers, but I wanted to thank you all for listening. I wanted to take as one final kind of idea, the concept of actively taking action early to expand your surface area for serendipity. And what I mean when I say that is what I did in the PhD was exactly what you should not do. You should not put your head down, work really hard, and come up for air as you hand in your thesis. That's absolutely the worst way to possibly do it, because all I found myself in a position to do was to try and grab for postdoc opportunities. I didn't have anything beyond some papers and some conference appearances that really made me look like a good candidate to any industry or otherwise groups. So I got exceptionally lucky with all steps of this journey that I went down. What I would say is start the process early. Take internships, take opportunities for consulting, come join some programs. I think I've even got some promo. We're running a program in the 3rd week of November. It's free. It's a really good business model. It's free. Equally, if you just like to kind of stay in touch with some of the things we're doing, I've left some of our socials there that you can follow. I promise you, if you take those sorts of opportunities, even though it may feel like you're moving into a realm outside of academia and outside of the purity of science, it will enable you, it will give you the skill sets that if you do want to continue in academia, to outcompete your peers. Equally, if you want to forge a career path for yourself in entrepreneurship or as a CEO in industry or anyone else, an innovator, whatever the walk in life that you want to take, you'll be better prepared for having sat in those sorts of environments. And with that, I will say thank you very much for listening again. Happy to take any questions. Hi, Clara.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure. Thanks, Ben. It was very inspiring talk presentation. Impressive, already over 50, right? Startups or like
absolutely
direction in such
really
a few
exciting.
years, right? I will start with a question. So you just picking on what you just said. But before I make a question, I would like to encourage you and to welcome to type your questions in the questions box, so this can be a bit more interactive, and you can discuss your concerns with Ben or anything that you would like to. So just picking on that last thing that you mentioned, so you said that starting early is very important, and I couldn't agree more. But in a setup of a PhD with, it's not only, I would say that it's not only that the PhD is focused, the PhD student is focused, or the postdoc is focused on his work, but it feels that there is not much space of opportunity or time to go and do these internships, or that this is not actually promoted by the academic environment. So is your company actually trying to work with the universities to create these opportunities, so internships, and to actually allow students or postdocs to go into that path?
Absolutely. So that I mean, that was a few kind of points that you touched on. Point number one, I would say, was people feel like there isn't the time or the opportunity to do it. There 100% is the time. There 100% is the opportunity. That was absolutely my kind of mentality too. Like, no, I need to write papers. Like, no, I need to sit in the lab for 12 hours today. I think it's important to keep in mind that at the end of the day, what you are doing, particularly with a rigorous program like a PhD, is preparing yourself for the future, right? There has been an opportunity cost to you using 4 years or 3.5 years of your life to convert to some hopefully fair advantage later on. If we know that the system beyond the PhD is very competitive in terms of academic pathway and industry pathway, and that technical people typically struggle to rise through the ranks of most industry groups, then we have a responsibility to ourselves, I think, as PhD students. Equally, I think our academics have a responsibility to us to make sure that we emerge from that process not only with fantastic academic credentials, but equally with a set of skill sets that mean that whichever route it is that we go down, we can excel there. So, find the time, even if it's just a week, right? Even if, preferably it's a little bit longer than that, but you can do it as like afternoons. You could do it as a couple hours a week, couple hours a month. I think just finding that opportunity for connection is really important. And if your supervisor, don't want to be too confrontational, but if your supervisor is of the opinion, and absolutely many are, that you should be in the lab, then I think, take that opportunity to practice some of the softer skills, like bringing people around along with you and negotiating with them, because that's a useful skill to have in life, to show them kind of the virtues of why it might be useful and further benefit the placement. And keep in mind also that the metrics that got today's academics to the positions that they are in, the lectureship and professorship positions that they are in, will not be the metrics that get you to those same positions. Increasingly, things are being emphasized, like industry collaborations and patents and number of spin-out companies. I've heard kind of whispers on the grapevine that patents will be worth X number of high impact papers. So actually, if you can develop some of the skill sets that mean that you are more collaborative by nature, more industry facing by nature, you again potentially have a higher likelihood of being successful going through those routes. So I think all those things to say, it's worth the initial struggle to develop those skills. And in terms of what we're doing at Spinup Science, yes, absolutely. Part of our program beyond that, after we go through the kind of interfacing process where we let you work with an early stage founding team over a week or a number of weeks, then we try and place you as an intern or as a consultant to put some kind of pocket money in your back pocket, whilst also developing, those kind of skill sets and that commercial kind of facing capability that you have. So that's something that we do, and absolutely get in contact with us if you're interested in learning more about it.
Yeah. You mentioned something very interesting, which is, and I think this is increasingly being taken in account, which is actually not only paper output, manuscripts output, but also patents and involvement into a startup or an idea, building up an idea. It's gradually being more taking in account when evaluating success or your profile to go to other positions. So I see that there's quite a few questions here, and so Catriona Aitken asks, "Hi Ben, I have heard from a lot of people that coming out of a PhD, you are overqualified and unexperienced, but as you say, PhDs actually have a high utility and a low risk profile. What would your advice to sell yourself to those who may have this mindset when interviewing you?"
Two things again. So I'm an optical physicist. The first role I applied for was at Thor Labs, an optical physics company that makes optical physics components for optical physicists. And they told me, we don't hire PhDs, we hire master's students because they're cheaper and we can just train them up. And also PhD students get bored and they leave because they're just kind of refining things. And that absolutely is true to a certain extent. You are like quite qualified in a particular area. But I think a good piece of advice that I was given quite early on was like, don't define yourself as, in my instance, an optical physicist, because that's exceptionally narrow and it'll be very rare that you find perfect overlap with an exact job opportunity that's exactly a PhD topic. At worst, the advice I would give is say, consider yourself a scientist, and that suddenly opens up so many possibilities for you. The other thing that, because we hire obviously quite a lot of PhDs into our company, the thing that always strikes me time and time again is what PhDs say when they want to get hired, which is, I've done a PhD, I really want to join your company because I'm really excited to help solve problems, because that's what PhDs consider themselves to be experts in, solving problems. But if you are hiring at the moment, at least, like you get 40 applications per position and every single person says that same thing. And usually the things that I look for are the distinguishing factors, right? Because it's a given, you've done a PhD, you're going to be fantastically smart, you're going to be fantastically good at solving problems. Why should I pick you over any of the other PhDs? And some of the things I look for are your ability to do that kind of 0 to 1 activity, to go from there's nothing in existence to there is something in existence. And I don't really mind what that is. Like, start a student group, like build a deck outside of your student house, like build a dog house or something, like do something and get in the habit of reliably being like, I have no pathway ahead of me set out. I need to recruit the things, the knowledge, the people, the materials, the whatever it is to enable me to succeed in this pathway, and just evidence that. Because if I would rather hire someone that can do that than do honestly anything else. Even if there isn't a technical qualification there, if you prove that you can make things happen, that's really, really, really rare, because it's like 1% of people that we interview ever evidence kind of some of those skill sets. So as soon as we find them, even if we aren't hiring, we try and hire them. It's just super useful. The other things I would say that are useful to do, unfortunately, the world is not a meritocracy. Like, the world is built by your ability to work well with others. So refine that skill set and evidence it. Say, I collaborated with X, this researcher or that industry group or whoever, or I went to these conferences and, I didn't just talk there, I came back with something. I came back with a collaboration opportunity or something, again, it's kind of in that theme of 0 to 1, but those are the skill sets that really distinguish you. Don't rely on kind of the old truisms of being a PhD, which is, I've got a PhD in my back pocket, I'll get a job because I'm smart. Really, you're still looking to distinguish further than that. I'll try and do shorter answers if people if there's quite a few questions.
I guess from there, what you're looking for is something, skills that are outside of that supervised environment. Because in your talk, you mentioned that during a PhD or an academic model, you are in the center, but there's a lot of support, of supervision around. So what you would be looking in the candidates is something that they build from scratch that is outside of that supervised tasks, right? Okay, absolutely. Right. Absolutely. So Kate Lydiard, so she asks, how much scope is there for all the postdocs to enter into the same pathway and change careers?
You absolutely can. And I'm going to tell you, because I think it's important, I'm going to tell you something important that gets kind of whispered a lot within industry, which is that the further you go, this, it's like a double-edged sword, right? Like the further you go down that academic route, the harder it is to come out of it. The more of kind of the academic, I don't know, product, I guess, you have become. You've got very specific skill sets. So by no means does that say you can't unpick yourself out of that trajectory and find something different. The way to do it is exactly the same. The way to do it is to start learning the language of the real world, of the commercial world of industry, to reach out and try and collaborate, or maybe just start a bit of a side hustle and see if you can sell some of your skill sets, your knowledge in a consulting effort. Really, like any of those things that teach you a bit more about what your knowledge base is actually worth in the world and how to present yourself to industry as opposed to how to present yourself to academia, because they are vastly different things. The kind of the social skills that you use are vastly different. Learning that sooner rather than later is honestly the most important thing, and that can be done more easily than you'd realize. You just need to actually set out to do it. So find an internship, find a consulting placement, find a collaborator in industry, and try and sit as close to that interface as humanly possible. And I always think it's good to just leave yourself with, irons in the fire. Worst comes to worst, you can't find that next postdoc position. You've spent the past 2 years developing really good relations with an industry group. Maybe there's a job opportunity there. Largely, the only reason I've been successful in doing any of the things that I've done is because I've had as many different irons in the fire as possible and hoped that one came good. That's part of the exercise. Always be doing things in parallel. Try not to be doing things too in series, because if that doesn't work, you don't have as many easy options to jump to.
Okay, we have quite a few questions actually. So the next one is from Ekundayo Samuel. I hope I'm pronouncing the names okay. So he says, thank you for your insightful talk. Please, how do you handle competitors?
Competitors to Spinup Science, or competitors to who? Clara, do you want to pick a competitor and then I'll talk to that?
I am not sure what he's talking about, but I'm guessing like in your business model, do you see any other competitors? So I would think, but you can type in, please. Ekundo, maybe to explain better.
To answer that question, competitors aren't a bad thing, right? And I think it's a very, I want to say scientific mentality, because that says that's kind of a bad thing. Like, I can absolutely relate when I first came out of the PhD and started working in this company, Xylo, that I would look at all of the competitors and be like, oh, we don't have a hope, like there's just there's no point, like we're not 5% better, we're not 10% cheaper, like why bother? And actually that goes back to an earlier point, like the world is not a meritocracy. Like doesn't come down to the spreadsheet of attributes as to whether you'll be successful or not. It's much more, I think, your capability to engineer success, your capability to work with people, sell them a convincing message, a dream, to bring them on board as stakeholders and to manage those relationships. And that's honestly how you go about winning, growing, starting a business, or winning, growing, starting anything, is to bring people around you. I think the thing that the kind of academic system doesn't teach you well enough is the absolute requirement to work with a strong team around you, because basically nothing can be achieved, nothing in the real world, nothing big, nothing ambitious can be achieved alone. You absolutely will need people around you. So learning how to bring them around you early as possible is, again, one of those things that I think is just incredibly useful, probably the most useful skill, absolutely the most useful skill that you can ever stand to learn, much more so than a PhD in physics or anything. Just the ability to rally people around you, because then you can find people that are better at things than you are, and there will be people that are better at other things than you are. So find them and bring them on board, and have them as an added attribute rather than a competitor. Would be kind of a broad answer to that question, but hopefully it ticks some of the boxes.
Yeah, so actually he said ideas competitors now. So I don't know what that means, but I guess it comes towards what you were saying, right?
There'll always be competitors. Don't worry about them too much. Do your thing, deliver value, build a product that you believe in. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if we go out of business because there are competitors teaching scientists how to be entrepreneurs better than we do, wonderful. We'll go do something else. Like our goal, we're driven by the fact that we want this activity to happen because we don't want interesting technologies locked away in universities, and we don't want really capable people having to become accountants or something. You know, we want them being innovation leaders and kind of seizing that potential.
Apologies, light went off. Okay, so then there's Rosalind Lethan saying, just interested in the gender split in entrepreneurship. The lack of security that startups generate seems like it might be more challenging for women with family commitments. Right, I guess it comes with the risk that you mentioned in the beginning, right?
Yeah, so I guess there's two things to separate there. Like, one is the risk profile of the PhD. I said assumes, and it won't be true for everyone. No house, no spouse, kind of at a free point in your life, you've just gone master's, PhD, starting a new thing. That won't be true for everyone. Should that discourage you? Absolutely not. There's an entrepreneur up in Edinburgh that I could name, but won't, that we work with, who has kids, has a family, is both an academic as well as trying to get her company up and off the ground. Absolutely, those things are entirely possible. In terms of the gender split, there is no asymmetry in terms of the number of males versus females that get started in the process. The thing that is broken about it at the moment, and partly why we started the Science Angel Syndicate to help rectify, is that the number of female entrepreneurs that actually can secure investment is about, I think it's like 10p for every pound of investment money goes to female entrepreneurs rather than male entrepreneurs. And that there's a whole host of factors behind why people think that is, but regardless of why it is, it's not a good approach to investing in companies and investing in people. So there's a really big change in the tide. Groups like Hermesa, which is an angel syndicate that is female investors investing in female founders that we're partnered with at Science Angel Syndicate. There's a whole bunch of different groups like that. So the marketplace is, if you want to call it the marketplace, the world is trying to correct itself, but absolutely there is some imbalance. Where that imbalance is most prevalent isn't in success rates. The success rates are basically dead even, if not slightly in favor of female founders. It's just in getting that first money through the door. So that's the bit that needs the most focus.
That's impressive. 10p for every pound. Oh my God. Okay. So there's another question from Anton Puzorov. Sorry about the names. So Ben, are you familiar with Entrepreneur First? If yes, what are your thoughts about their approach to starting companies?
Entrepreneur First is great. I think they're a fantastic group. They basically, for anyone that doesn't know what they are, they take smart people, stick them in a room together and try and ideate companies. I think that is a great approach, and absolutely one that if you don't have an idea lodged in the back of your head or a core piece of technology that you're thinking about commercializing, is a great program that you should join. The problem with it is that is an approach called market pull. It's look for a problem, build a technology or a solution to solve that problem. What it doesn't take into account is technology push, which is what universities do, right? Universities come up with amazing pieces of technology because people want to see if they can. And sometimes those are cures for cancer or treatments for diabetes or, whatever, anything in between. And we need a model that maps to that process also. Like, we can't, all this research is publicly funded. If it can be a benefit to the public at the end of the day, we've got a responsibility as scientists to pick it up and move it there. If when we go out to industry, it's too scary and early for them, we need to find a different mechanism of making that work. And really that's, I think the piece of the puzzle that was missing was making sure that we have PhDs, postdocs, master's students sufficiently technically skilled, which great universities do that anyway, but sufficiently entrepreneurially minded and commercially aware that they can be that missing piece of the puzzle, take those technologies out of the university and turn them into interesting companies and try and get those solutions into the marketplace.
Right, yeah. So Iran Breda says, thank you, Ben, that was very inspiring. Any advice for a postdoc less risk tolerance?
Depends what you want to do in life. So if you want to be an academic, do things that give you an unfair advantage in that pathway. If you want to jump out of academia, do things that start to develop the skill sets that mean that you would map more favorably into industry. And repeatedly, the feedback that we get back from the industry partners that we work with is that the postdoctoral candidates are absolutely technically fantastic, but they want them to be able to do things like rally a team around them, or find a team, or hire in a team, or do budget predictions, or manage that budget, or understand how to win money internally within the organization, which you do in some realms, right? You write grants, you do those sorts of things. So like the metrics are similar, but the routes to achieving those metrics are different. So anything that you can do that kind of fills out those skill sets is useful. And honestly, it's incredibly difficult to chalk and talk. Like, no programs we run are chalk and talk programs. Like, the best way, the absolute definitive, fastest way to learn it is to sit in the space where it's happening and observe and absorb it by osmosis as much as anything else. And it's that know-how that exists in those kind of spheres that is the most valuable piece. Not a lot of people have them. What I would say is, if you are thinking, honestly, best thing I could ever advise anyone to do, if you can tolerate the risk, is spend 6 months in a startup company. The ideal startup company is a technology company, somewhere between employee number 4 and employee number 8, because what you're looking for is access into the full stack of the company, from janitor, which you will probably be, to CEO, because understanding how all the pieces of the puzzle work show you how the system as a whole works, and also shows you where you might be most interested in kind of sliding in within that full stack. So if you can tolerate it, 6 months. If you can't, less than that. And honestly, the worst thing that happens is the company goes out of business, or you don't enjoy doing what you're doing and you go find something else. You'll be infinitely more employable. Infinitely, I cannot stress that enough, infinitely more employable by having seen that full piece. But not if you go there and just do the technical side, because you're already a technical master. Go there and see how the wider piece of the puzzle works. That's the really useful bit.
Okay, sorry, Corey. In the sake of time, I will have to stop questions now. We had many more questions, but I would like to thank everyone, and to thank you, Ben, for these wonderful, inspiring discussions. And so you can continue the conversation online. Follow the Biochem at BiochemSoc, and at Spinup Science, or at PB Publishing on Twitter. So for more information about careers, including career profiles and job-seeking advice, can be found on our website at the biochemistry.org/education/careers. But you can also find some day-in-life career profiles on the Biochemist webpage. And we welcome suggestions for future topics that we run as part of this webinar series. And if you would like to watch them again, please visit our website or YouTube channel. The recording from today's webinar will also be available to watch within the next couple of weeks. So if you've missed also any of the other 40 webinars that are part of this webinar series, do go to the website or YouTube channel. So if you have an idea for the webinar, for a webinar in 2022, we do invite you to submit a proposal for an upcoming webinar. Just go to the Biochemistry Society website. And you can also find more information about webinars, propose your webinar, and watch previous recordings in the Biochemistry website, so biochemistry.org webinars. So join us for also the next webinar in this series that is entitled Biochemistry, One Molecule at a Time, on Wednesday, the 10th of November at 2 GMT. And it's linked also to a special issue with the same title published on essays in biochemistry. And during this session, we will hear from 3 authors from the issue who will be sharing their work in the biosciences community. And finally, I would like to highlight that in these challenging times, it's more important than ever to stay connected and engage with your fellow molecular bioscientists. It's an extraordinary time for all of us, but it's also an exciting time, and to join the Biochemical Society community of researchers and specialists. So to stay connected and to take advantage of key benefits, including discounted registration fees for society courses and meetings, exclusive access to a wide range of grants and bursaries, and personal online access to two of their journals as well. So visit our website, the Biochemical Society website. And with this, I would like to thank you all and thank Ben once more. And this was a very exciting and inspiring discussion. Thank you, Ben, and thank you all. Have a good afternoon.